King's Blue, that's just ultramarine and white. Van Dyke Brown, that's usually just black and transparent red. Cheat colors, premixes, convenience tubes, no matter what you call them, these colors are perfect shortcuts for artists. I'll show you how to premix and tube your very own cheat colors so you can get started painting faster. Hi, I'm Lee, and welcome to my studio and channel where I discuss tips, tricks, and techniques for oil and acrylic painters. So first, why do we want to make cheat colors? There's no shortage of quality pigments available to artists. Well, for starters, these tubes can quickly get us to a higher value of our primary color. Many of our blues, like ultramarine and phthalo, are very dark in value. They require mixing a lot of white to bring the raw color up to a more usable sky bluish color. It can be much easier to pull out a tube of King's Blue that's pre-mixed to a higher value as our starting point. We also start with a consistent value every time. You don't have to go back and forth with the blue and white to get a previously mixed higher value. Or maybe we want an opaque equivalent to a semi-transparent pigment. For instance, burnt umber is usually semi-transparent. Let's say we really enjoy making opaque shadows in our paintings. Well, we can mix up a batch of opaque burnt umber equivalents. Whatever your reason, cheat colors can be very helpful in starting your paint day faster. Today, I want to mix up an acrylic version of a Prussian blue. While we usually only find Prussian blue in oils and watercolor, genuine Prussian blue in acrylics is almost non-existent. Often called Prussian blue hue, it's usually a mixture of other pigments. This is because the Prussian blue pigment is sensitive in alkaline mediums like acrylic paint. Prussian blue needs to be in a pH level of 7 or less. Mediums like linseed oil and gum arabic or oil and watercolor fit this need. Jackson Art has a blog post about this topic, and I'll leave a link below if you want to do a deep dive. True Prussian blue is a beautiful, saturated blue with a green undertone without the vibrant intensity of a phthalo blue. Many acrylic manufacturers will create their Prussian blues starting with a base of phthalo blue and adding black and some other colors. But to my eye, this creates more of a shade or tone of phthalo rather than a hue of Prussian. Plus, having 3 or more pigments in a cheat color may complicate the color mixing process with other colors. But through trial and error, I found a secret, repeatable recipe with just 2 pigments that gets us to about 90–95% of the way to our true Prussian blue in acrylic paint. And today, I'm going to share that recipe with you.
To get started with mixing up our cheat colors, we'll need a palette or palette paper, palette knives, gloves, a fresh empty paint tube, tape, and a marker for labeling the tape. Bonus supplies are Stay Wet palette for water mediums like acrylic paint, Ziploc bag, and box tape. And lastly, any reference paint and the paint we're going to use for mixing. Today I'll be referencing my Prussian blue in oils, Pigment Blue 27, and mixing my cheat colors up with my secret recipe of Golden's acrylic phthalo green yellow shade or Pigment Green 36 and anthraquinone blue, Pigment Blue 60. Since I'm mixing acrylic, I'll start with my pre-wetted Stay Wet palette, but a paper glass palette works too. Then I'll lay out my paint that I'll be mixing. I'll start with my anthraquinone blue and throw out a couple piles. Then I'll start adding a little bit of phthalo green. Phthalo green is, just like the blues, very powerful, so a little bit does go a long way. Keep in mind, there's no need to add any mediums or do any grinding of pigments. The paint from the tubes is already at peak performance from a structural standpoint, so all the hard work is done and we're just mixing the colors to our desired hue. Let's check our cheat mix to our Prussian blue and oils. Still a bit warm in my eye, so let's add just a little bit more green. I should be pretty close at this point, so I'll thoroughly mix the pile. Once the pile is thoroughly mixed, I'll then just kind of pull off a little side here just to check and do a tint real quick. I'll add just a little bit more of my pile, see how this works, and I'm thinking this looks pretty darn good. Okay, I'll now test my transparency just to see how it compares to the oil. All right, we're looking really good now. Okay, time to put on those paint gloves. We're about to get messy. So let's grab our empty paint tube and begin collecting our paint in a pile. So it's at this point that we can begin painting one of 2 ways. The first is taking our palette knife and globbing it down the sides of the empty paint tube, but there's a second option. If you have the bonus supplies of the sandwich bag and box tape, we can go with option number 2. Pick any bottom corner of the bag and tear off a small piece of box tape. Place the box tape over the entire corner and flip the bag over. Tear off a second similar sized box tape piece and put it on the other side of the bag. Now, take some scissors or a box knife and trim up the box tape to get the excess out of our way, while making sure not to get too close to the corners of the bag. Now that we have our bag set up, let's begin putting the pile of paint into the bag. If you haven't made up enough paint pile yet, go ahead and make up some more and add it to the bag. With our sandwich bag full of paint, let's clean off our work area so we can begin adding the paint to the empty paint tube. The last thing we need to do to get the paint into the tube is to cut a small piece of the taped corner off. The box tape acts as a support along the seams of the bag. I've had the unfortunate situation of having the seams come apart during squeezing, resulting in the hole getting bigger and bigger and things getting messier and messier. Much like icing a cake, we're putting paint down a tube. We want to squeeze the paint all the way down to the taped corners of the bag and begin dropping the paint down the tube. Ideally, we want the corner of the bag that's cut to allow us to stick some of the bag a little way down the tube. If the paint starts to pile up in the tube, give the tube a few taps and the paint should drop down towards the paint cap. While still a little messy, I find it's a little easier than globbing it down the sides. With either method, once you have about 2/3 of the tube filled, begin crimping the tube down the middle, allowing air to escape along the sides. While trying to remove as much air as possible without overflowing the paint out of the tube, begin folding a small section, sealing it. Clean off any excess paint that may have squeezed out while folding. You can continue folding over the paint tube end until you have a slight resistance from the paint inside. Or, if you have a paint tube squeezer, you can run it through the rollers, but keep in mind you really want to be careful not to roll it too much or the pressure inside will build up and the paint will shoot out once you open the cap. I can speak from experience, and it's quite unpleasant. Next, we want to put tape around the tube, our label, and apply a little paint so we know what the color is at a glance, and then label the tube with our recipe.
Now we have a solid acrylic Prussian blue hue. But how does Prussian blue compare to other single pigment blues? Well, check out this video comparing the tints and transparencies of blue pigments like cobalt, phthalo, and ultramarine. I even compare a rare new blue in this video. Which blue will be your favorite?